Good to see you, Mr. Cole. Just a week removed. A couple of just questions generally to make sure, just for the record, and I don't want to belabor this, but I do want clarity because there's a lot that's been flying around. We are all aware, disagreements aside, of the porous nature of our southern border. Not going to dwell on it. We've covered it, but obviously, as I've stipulated, and I think my friend from Texas, Chairman McCall, would agree. I mean, we've had an godly number of people that have been flooding across the border and dealing with all the issues involving that, tragedies we've recounted numerous times here. In particular, the data that was released recently that we're at 24,300 and X, I think, Chinese nationals that have come across the southern border that we know of, not counting gotaways, which is a number that exceeds all of 2023 fiscal year. So in 6 months, we've exceeded all of FY23. And that compares to a number of about 381 in FY21, the last year in which it was President Trump's policies predominantly driving the reality of the border. Is that, I assume the chairman would agree that poses a not insignificant national security threat to the United States of America, that we've got those kinds of numbers from what I'm understanding to be 85% single adults of that number of, so we're not talking about a lot of children and so forth, of that number of 24,300 X in 6 months. Does the chairman agree with that?
Yeah, I do. It is a national security threat. And let me just say, when we were in the White House at the beginning of the discussions, it was going to be 4 threats. Threat from Iran, the threat from Putin, the threat from China, and then the threat from our southern border. That's the back door. If we don't have the back door shut and the threats come in, and you know, as I do, as chairman of Homeland Security, when you're talking about 350 on the terror watch list, and how many do we not know about? When the world's on fire and Hamas is out there, and Afghanistan is turning into a terror ground again, they released all these prisoners from the Bagram base that are ISIS-K and Al-Qaeda. I'm very concerned that something's going to happen. And I think something will. And it's again, a real threat to our national security.
Yeah, and I agree with the chairman. And I would just say, without, there's a whole bunch of stuff, but just in general, those numbers, the extent to which you've got the fentanyl seizures have been running at about 1,000 pounds a month. The numbers just last month alone were about 190,000 at the southern border. I think close to 250,000 when you factor in southern border plus parole plus northern border and others of the number of people apprehended. But again, that's not counting the gotaways. And then you've got the known or suspected terrorists, the gentleman just referring to, that we're already at about half of what we had last year, which was a real high at 169 is the data I have. That might be a little variable. But that specifically the policies of parole. For example, we have at least a known homicide suspect entering via the CBP-1 app just last year, July 2023, who was released into the United States and committed a murder and was arrested in Middletown, New York. My point of all of that is, and without going through all of that, is all of that is front and center. A lot has been wrapped into the political drama around H.R. 2 and whether you would do it or don't do it and who has it and all of that. But just simple fact of the matter, though, is in this year, whoever's fault it is, whether it's President Biden's or whether it's MAGA extremist Republicans, to use the vernacular of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, whoever's fault it might be, it remains true today that we have not passed and got the president to sign into law anything that would meaningfully change or alter what's happening at the border in a significant way. Is that a true characterization?
We have not, we passed H.R. 2 out of the House.
Right. I said, but signed into law. Right. So we've passed out of the House. But again, even just the back and forth aside about whose fault it all is, what has not happened is we have not signed into law anything to deal with the border.
But can I make a point?
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And I've been doing this for a long time.
Sure.
This is an enforcement issue. It's not as much of a legislative issue. We throw more money at this thing, but the problem is this. We had policies in the prior administration that worked. Remain in Mexico has been on the books for 30 years. It's just we finally had a president that would enforce it. So a lot of this, we could enact But if he's not going to enforce it, and that's it, remain in Mexico, I marked that up out of my committee as an HR too. He would rather us give him cover with some bipartisan watered down bill than something like he could go back to what the Trump administration did with existing authorities and secure that border. He's the one that made the choice not to do it. He reversed the policies. When I went over, when we present our case to the Senate in the so-called trial that didn't happen, get this. Mayorkas, there's a statute, as you know, aggravated felons must be detained, shall be detained. You know, as an attorney, that shall means mandatory. Yep. Who are aggravated felons? Murderers, rapists, pedophiles, drug traffickers. And he sends a memo to his Border Patrol agents saying, hey, don't take prior convictions into account when determining whether to detain. So what was the result of that policy? All these dangerous, violent criminals released in our society.
So, and I agree with the chairman, and I'll just move to the conclusion on this, which is that I partially agree with the chairman. I recognize his point. I agree with the general point about the blame there. Where my position is that there's an Article 1 responsibility to force an administration that doesn't follow the law to follow the law, and importantly, to recognize that even under a president that does follow the law, whether it was Obama or Trump or anybody before, Jay Johnson recognized problems. We had problems with the Trump administration, with TVPRA, with Flores, with judicial opinions, with a cross-section of the law that's hard to enforce. All of those things that we need to address it, and we need to address those issues in order to actually secure the border, and Congress does need to act. And so my question is, and we know the answer, and we have disagreements on the merits of weighing what we should do on these things. But to be clear, we had a rule last night that was focused on an HR2 play. Some of us disagreed with that play because we thought it was, frankly, a fiction. It was just a sideshow that wasn't going to result in anything. So, but this rule will not include anything that touches the border in any meaningful way. That's correct, right?
Well, there is a separate vote on the border with a separate rule.
Correct. Yeah. And that rule we took up last night, that's been effectively suspended. But we have not, nothing in this bill, this rule, the set of bills that we're talking about here would address the border, correct?
Yeah, I mean, like you're getting above my pay grade a little bit, but let me just say, from a pragmatic standpoint, they have not entertained HR2. They will not entertain it now. And the situation is very dire in the spots that we're trying to address. And, I wish it was, I agree with you. We're both from Texas. And I wish it was a perfect world. And
I hear the chairman, and I'm not sure, and I do not mean to put him on the spot about Texas and what we're doing and weighing all of this. I'm just for the purposes of for those who are reaching a calculation that's different than some of our colleagues, that it is important for the world to know that we are going to proceed with a rule here that is going to advance foreign aid to the tune of $95 billion, roughly, of various forms and fashions, predominantly 2/3 of which going to Ukraine, another block going to Israel, another block going to Taiwan, another block going to submarines and other stuff and things that, are overall defense needs, and that none of it is going to address the southern border. And I agree with the gentleman that money wouldn't help the southern border. You got to have changes to force the administration to enforce the law.
Asylum is a genuine no.
Correct, and parole, and parole. So the second question is that I believe I am correct that of the dollars that are going, that the loan program only really applies to I'm going to roughly round the $8 billion ish of the non-lethal accounts, right, that are for the Ukrainian government can use for other purposes. Is that roughly correct? That the loan can only apply to that subset of the money. And so then of that, I am under the understanding that the president can forgive up to 50% of that, and the other 50% could be forgiven in the future, but only with congressional action. Is that a correct characterization? I'm looking back at staff too, because I'm always like wondering, I just don't have the facts, because Mr. Cole, if you have the answer to that too. Chairman Cole.
As I understand it, yes, although there's still a congressional component. That is, we could disapprove of the loan forgiveness.
Okay, so the president could unilaterally, the president could decide to forgive, but we could disapprove of that forgiveness.
Correct.
Got it. And then in the future, Congress would have to be consulted before forgiving the second half.
That's also correct.
Okay, all right, just so I know. There is, as I think the Democratic ranking member acknowledged, I think that there is humanitarian aid, that some of which could go to Gaza, and that's we're acknowledging that of some amount of the $9 billion, it wouldn't be the full amount, right? Because there's some of that's for refugees, some of it's for foreign aid, but there's 5.6 billion, I think, of the 9 or something like that could ultimately get to Gaza. Well, but I thought I'm not trying to be pejorative. It's just facts. I thought of the 9 billion, I thought 4-ish is refugee specific, and another. Is that not true? Did I have that wrong? Okay, I thought there was a characterization. Is that not accurate? That like 5.x is available for humanitarian generally, and like 4-ish is specific to refugees.
Apparently, there are two accounts, but they're both for the, it's not divided, but it's
Okay.
the way in which you said.
Okay,
There
I'm
are
just
two
again
accounts
just
in which that money flows.
I'm just trying to for the few members watching all of this and a few Americans, I want them to at least know the facts on it. Obviously, I've got concerns about that in terms of dollars that can flow and end up in the hands of Hamas.
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
The one point is, this was a very important point, is we prohibit all funding to UNRWA.
Sure.
Because UNRWA, as you know, 12 employees were part of the invasion.
Yep.
Israel, their headquarters were underneath, or Hamas's headquarters were underneath UNRWA in the tunnel. So none of this money can go to UNRWA.
Sure, and I appreciate that, and that is a good move. And I introduced legislation 3 years ago to defund, UNRWA, recognizing why that's a travesty. I wish we'd have done that before October 7th. We had votes in our appropriations bills last September to do that. I applaud Republicans. We were trying to do that. But I would note, though, that a lot of these funds are fungible, and just knocking down that one account on UNRWA doesn't necessarily prohibit through these billions of dollars flowing. And in fact, many watchers of this, including friends of mine in Israel, who have raised the question to me in direct communication, saying this additional money, while we're funding Israel and they want the funds, and they do, they recognize this money would be used by an administration that is hell-bent on, frankly, interfering with Israel to find a way to get that money to ways that, and if it gets to Gaza, it gets to Hamas.
But my direction is private NGOs, Catholic Relief Services, right? World Food Program. These are, David Beasley, World Food Program, now Cindy McCain, but now Catholic Relief Services. They're on the ground.
Yeah.
And they should be taking over the responsibilities of UNRWA.
Well, my only observation on that is I don't have a lot of confidence in NGOs after what I've been seeing down on the southern border. But moving on, just for the sake of time, and I'm going to skip a couple things that I wanted to cover. But one general question for you, Mr. McCall, which may not be fair to you versus another member, and I want to be careful in the way I ask this for purposes of national security and everything else. But how would we characterize America's relative, within a publicly available to talk about non-classified way, if it's possible, and it may not be, relative stockpile of munitions from today, from where we were, say, in March of 2022, 2 years ago, before we were engaging in support for Israel, for Ukraine, well, Israel too, but for Ukraine, again, within the parameters of what we can publicly talk about.
Yeah, and I don't have the exact numbers, but what I'll tell you is what we have put into Ukraine are older, the old weapons. Old stockpiles that were sitting around, and what this 80% again of this funding goes to our own defense industrial base to modernize and update our defense industrial base and produce new weapons that are better. We're giving them old stuff, and Eastern Europe's given all the old Russian equipment that they have, so they're getting the older things. We want to build the newer and better and modernized weapons.
Well,
and we're going to put a lot of money into, this map shows a pretty good, where all this is going to go to states to provide a lot of jobs. I have to say, Mr. Roy, you're my friend from Texas, that we have a defense industrial base problem.
Yeah,
and
I concur.
And it's 100%. A national security problem. And that's the thing I like about the bills. We put 80% of it to fixing that defense industrial base that I believe is broken.
Well, with what did you have, Chairman Cole?
To Chairman McCall's point, and your very, very good question, an enormous percentage is replenishment. I mean, well over $23-24 billion. Same time, and one of the areas, and I want to be very careful how I say this,
Right.
but let's just take an item like 155 millimeter shells. Okay, what we've done so far has more than doubled the capacity of the United States to produce those shells. And what will happen in this supplemental, and this is, from Defense Subcommittee work, will more than double it again. So, and Chairman McCall is exactly right. I mean, what we my district has air defense artillery in it at Fort Sill, and we trained a lot of the Ukrainians that are using the Patriot, but they were training on older weapon systems. There's 4 different varieties of these. They were playing on 1s and 2s. We're buying 3rd and 4s. So there is, a real effort to increase the capacity to produce, maintain the stockpiles that we need, and again, move the older stuff out, which is still better than anything they had available to them. But I don't know if that's helpful at all, but I just wanted to share
But the
that.
gentleman
No, it
yield
is.
for 1 second.
Yes, ma'am.
Just on that issue, because I've asked that question. This is a DOD estimate that at least $50 billion of the package is for the U.S. defense industrial base across 30 states. So, and that is,
Yeah.
that's what DOD is estimating.
Well,
this.
and I think the gentlelady, and there's some of these things that we can't get into detail here in a public setting,
Exactly.
and I'm aware of that, and I wanted to bring that out for a number of reasons, because there's a lot of, and everybody's guilty of it, there's a lot of sort of painting with a broad brushstroke of why people are concerned with, oppose, or otherwise where they land on certain of these issues. One can be, as I would characterize myself as, fully supportive of wanting to fund Israel, fully cognizant of the dangers of not holding the line against Putin, but still be adamant of our need to secure our own border, differences of opinion aside about how, but having failed to do so, and simultaneously concerned of whether or not we're going to be able to succeed in Ukraine and how the money has been previously spent. So even here today in the testimony, we have heard, but in a positive, I think, posturing by the chairman, I think, of saying we're going to try to release and force the administration to provide at least certain weapons that might help them win it, and be more aggressive on that front. But meanwhile, a lot of my constituents are going, well, wait, we had $113 billion, and some of that's been allocated, and I get there's different ways to frame those dollars, that was already put forward and appropriated. And you're saying, well, okay, how was that spent? And so now we're trying to say, well, if Ukraine needs more in order to, hold the line, and to be clear, I don't have a clear mission out of this administration. I don't know whether we're talking about the 1991 lines. I don't know whether we're talking about, every inch of Crimea, every inch of Donbass. I don't know whether we're talking about, we're trying to buy time to hold the line on the western edge of the front and, east of Kyiv to try to prevent them from coming to Kyiv, but then have a serious discussion and a ceasefire about the territories that's already been disputed and gained by Russia. I don't have the foggiest clue of what our administration's position and posture is on that with clarity, because we have gotten different views out of the administration on that. There has been, kind of the lean into what Mr. Zelensky wants and say, we want, 1991, we want every inch of the territory. And then there's been more, we just want to make sure we can hold the line and don't let them advance because we don't want them to get anywhere near the western side of Ukraine and therefore be right on the line with Poland and our friends there. Yeah. And look, I'm not nearly as traveled as the chairman because of my committees of jurisdiction don't take me there. But one of my earliest trips was when I was Senator Cruz's chief of staff. I went on a trip to over a week to Jerusalem, Poland, Estonia, and Kiev. I'd say Kiev because when I went there, that's how we said it. Kiev now. And was very steeped in what they face. And I just think it's really important for the entire world to understand the dynamic of the dispute at the moment. That it's not some monolithic isolationists who don't want to support our role in the world to prevent a Putin and to stand for democracy. But it is a real and reasoned debate about priorities when, if you look at during Reagan's time, when you look at the relative debt to GDP ratio under Reagan, right, when we were probably at about a 37%-ish when he did the buildup in the early 80s of our debt to GDP. Today, we're now $1.10, $1.20, depending on how you count the debt. And so we're in a real problem. And when you look at the overall defense spending, so we've talked here just now about ramping up the defense industrial base on the back of Ukraine. That might be a good thing for our country to get our production level up. But at what cost over there? Will we win? Is there a mission that's achievable here? How many Ukrainians have to die, depending on how we get there in the process, which is a very real concern. I think the gentlelady's point was in kind of the negative. The ranking member was, hey, how many Ukrainians have to die before we act? Some of us are saying, I think, at least with some reasoned debate, like, I want to help you. How many Ukrainians have to die while this perpetuates without a will to go make sure we win it? How many Ukrainians are dying right now because we're funding it without a very clear, authoritative path to victory to ensure that we're going to get it done? So I think those are questions that some of us are wrestling with vis-a-vis this administration, how much money we should then fund into that. And then meanwhile, our borders being wide open with Chinese foreign nationals coming across the border and so forth. And a last point about this, about how we fund war. There's been a lot of discussions in the think tank world, which is only halfway relevant, really, generally speaking, about, what you might call the ghost budgeting, right? Since basically September 11th, we have been funding effectively endless conflicts of various sorts. And people say that in a pejorative sense. I don't even mean it that way. There have been very reasoned and important engagements that we've been carrying out. But we've been doing that with OCO. We've been doing that with budget line items with supplemental spending like we're doing now. Whereas prior to September 11th, we were forcing sacrifice among the American people to say, okay, if your blood and or your treasure are going to be sent into battle, that you have to sacrifice. There's going to be increased taxes. There's going to be war bonds. There's going to be, you're going to stop buying sugar. You're going to stop buying tires. You're going to have something that you're going to have a stake in that as a country. And we have not been doing that. We've literally done nothing but borrow money to fund conflict for the last 25 years. That, I believe, is a fundamental problem and disconnect here. So to the concern that I have here is that plus border equals problem with the rule. Last point I'll make, and then I'll yield back for purposes of time, is this notion of this being kind of an open process. And with all due respect to the former chairman and the current chairman of appropriations, and I hear what he's saying. But in truth, for the average American to understand, what we've got now, I think to the approval of our Democratic colleagues, is effectively the Senate bill broken into some pieces, put down on the floor, yes, with some possible amendments, largely all predetermined and pre-cooked, and it's going to be what we call MERVed. That's a weird inside the Beltway term for smashing it back together. They're going to be put back together to send over to the Senate in roughly the structure of the Senate bill. This is why we know, and the reporting confirms, that Senator Schumer and to some degree Leader Jeffries have all applauded that this is the result that they want. The reason President Biden yesterday was saying that he's applauding it is it's the result the president wants. This is to achieve the objective of effectively the Senate bill from 65 days ago. Therefore, that is why some of us have strong reservation, and more than strong reservation, but objection. Because this is not putting Ukraine on the floor for a week of full unfettered debate like we're having here. This is a good conversation. The panel has laid out, I think, a whole lot of really important points about what we need to do as a country. But what we've done is decided, and we've decided it in the way we typically do, without the full-throated debate I think you should have on the floor on independent bills, or if you're going to package it together, then last point I'll make is you should honor the commitments that you make. And with all due respect to the speaker, when the speaker said, for example, on November 5th, 2023, we can do all these things together, but when you couple Ukraine and the border, that makes sense to people. Or when the speaker says in December 5th, 2023, I explained that supplemental Ukraine funding is dependent upon enactment of transformative change to our nation's border security laws. Or when the speaker said on December 12th, 2023, from the very beginning, when I handed the gavel, we needed clarity on what we're doing in Ukraine and how we'll have proper oversight of the spending of precious taxpayer dollars, and we needed transformative change at the border. Or as the speaker said at the border, down in Texas in January. Quote, I told the president that I've been saying for many months, and that is we must have change at the border, substantive policy change. I could go on and on. I won't. This is where the people that I represent fall. And that is why I have strong reservations and concerns and don't believe that I can support the rule. The gentlelady's been wanting to talk, and I'll certainly yield to the gentlelady.
I appreciate gentlemen yielding, and I thank you. And just as a point of clarification, because there's been a lot of discussion about the border. But when there was a bipartisan agreement overall, and the border piece was a part of that, and this was quite afterward, when the former president indicated his opposition to the bill, and then it fell apart, and we were no longer going to have any border piece of it. I just think it's important to note, because we keep making reference to border security, okay? This was Division B, Border Security and Combating Fentanyl Supplemental Appropriations, 2024. And I don't have time here for the committee to read what was then excised, and what the Republicans have walked away from what was in this a portion of the bill in terms of border security. In the criminal division, combating human trafficking and smuggling that affect U.S. border communities. This is the Texas communities that we're talking about. Yes, additional immigration teams, Marshal Services, Federal Prison Detention, Drug Enforcement Administration, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, federal law enforcement training centers. I'm not reading it all because it's just too much. There was efforts on the unaccompanied children program. USCIS Direct Hire Authority, ICE Direct Hire Authority, Supplemental Commissioner Authority and definitions, training for U.S. Border Patrol, electronic notices to appear. It goes on. Again, there was substantial approval in a bipartisan way on border security measures. And when the former president made his determination and said, this is not something we want to provide a win for, I think the American public needs not just to hear border security, but I think the American public has got to understand where the Republicans have really walked back on border security by saying no to this. You can just continue to use that phrase and the pejorative way, but not talk about what it is that was relinquished in terms of getting control of the border. And I am someone who believes that we do have to have border security and get control of the border.
And I appreciate that. I want to give the chairman time to speak, and I want to be able to get my time back. But the chairman wanted to engage.
Yeah, just quickly to add a couple of things, and I didn't particularly want to be drawn into the border discussion, but I will add this. It does matter how you arrive at a deal. We produced H.R. 2 through a normal committee process. People got their fingers on it. They negotiated, they fought, they came to a product. They moved the product not only out of committee but across the floor. With all due respect to our friends in the Senate, that's not what happened there. Yeah. I actually don't think it's fair to say there was a bipartisan deal. There was a deal between three senators.
Right.
And when, one side, look, these are friends of mine. I'm not critical of anybody. But the process that was set up, it would have been better if they'd have done, they don't have to take what we do. They'd been better off to take what we did and change it however they want in a normal committee. That's how people come to deals. And the Senate has moved away from that, and I regret that. But all that aside, I think my friend made so many good points about the concerns that all of us have about the conduct of the conflict in Ukraine. I can hardly think of anything that you said that I disagree with. I worry about the lack of defined objectives. I worry about the open strategy. I will tell you this, and I will say this, maybe not in defense, but in explanation of the administration. We had a defense subcommittee hearing on appropriations several months ago, may have even been late last year, where these questions were raised. And we had an assistant secretary of state for international security, director of operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the secretary or assistant secretary for international security made the point. She said, look, the objective is probably, it needs to be obvious that what Russia did was a strategic failure. And so that nobody does anything like this again. And this was ahead of the counteroffensive, which did not go as well as we would have hoped. I think that's fair to say, or Ukraine would have hoped. And she said that may well impact how you define that. Now, I look at it and I can say to this point, Russia has pushed Finland and Sweden into NATO. I guarantee you that's not something they wanted to do. To this point, they've suffered over 300,000 casualties. That's not something they planned on or wanted to do. To this point, they've been forced into measures they thought they would never have to take. They thought this would be a war that was over in weeks, not many months, now into its third year in some way. But I give the Ukrainians most credit all. They're doing the fighting and dying. We've been pretty indispensable to that effort.
That's right.
So have our friends in Europe who've provided enormous amounts. I've never seen them step up like this. And there are a dozen countries who have actually committed a larger percentage of their GDP and a larger percentage of their budgets than us. And that's their credit. They're closer, and I get one. If you're from Poland or you're from the Baltic states, you're from Moldova, you look at this a little bit differently than we do because you don't have the luxury of distance and the relative security of the United States. So I do think this is evolving. I do think, however anybody votes on it, I really respect the different points of view in the Congress on this. And I'm very careful about not calling people that oppose Ukraine isolationists because they aren't. Most of them support Israel. Most of them support what we're trying to do in the Western Pacific. How can you be an isolationist if that's it? They've got a problem about how this war is being conducted, the nature of our commitment, the lack of strategy. There are, I will say this, in the legislation we have, and I'm not going to tell you I'm 100% satisfied with it because I'm not, but there's a lot more oversight requirements than there ever were in the Senate bill. There is a requirement that they produce a strategy. Whether they do or not, as you know, you've been around here a while too, as both a staff and a member. Just because we tell them to do something doesn't mean an administration of either side always do what we tell them to do. But there is more in that. And I will say this is not the package the Senate wanted. They sent us what they wanted. They're getting back something different. Now, my friends made the points, which I agree with, that financially this is broadly the same thing. But it is brought in components where people can vote individually how they choose to. And you can make it very apparent, I'm not for this, but I am for this. Or you can be against it all. But the body will work its will. Individual members will get to vote how they want to. If you support Israel, you won't have to vote for Ukraine. And on the other side of the aisle, some of my friends are very skeptical about the Israeli aid component, would like to attach a lot of conditions to it, do stuff like that. But we're not going to force them to vote for Israeli aid because they were for Ukrainian aid. That I think is a big difference. And it's also going to force the Senate, again, to accept some measure we want. Is it perfect? No. But to my friend, the ranking member on appropriations point, it's governing. It's a compromise. It's kind of the best we could do in the time frame that we have. But that doesn't take anything away from the legitimacy. My friend from Texas' points are about the process and honestly about some of his concerns, because I share some of those very same concerns about the manner in which the administration has conducted the war. I think those are fair things to point out. I would just, again, say we are at a critical point. I kind of look at this in for a penny, in for a pound. I do not want to leave an ally high and dry. And frankly, I don't want to see happen in Ukraine what happened in Afghanistan. I do not want to see that kind of situation unfold. I think it's a terrible message for the rest of the world. I think what happened in Afghanistan was a terrible message to the rest of the world. I think that's one of the reasons why we're here right now. So with that, it's a long time. I appreciate.
If I could, I'm going to. I don't want to cut off any of the panelists. I'm not trying, but on my time, the panel has gone a while, so I want to be able to yield back to the chairman. But I have to make one response to the ranking member, and then I want to yield back, and that is on the border issues.
Right.
The package bill would have demonstrably codified the mass release of individuals by its own wording. It was structured in such a way to set a constant flow of individuals into the United States. And notwithstanding all of the funding mechanisms that the gentlelady outlined, that is funding that would have been used predominantly to continue the processing and the flow of the mass abuse of both parole and asylum to flood more people into the country, which has resulted very demonstrably in individuals being in the country who are dangerous and attached to terrorist organizations and criminals that have then resulted in the death of Americans, very specifically. And then I'll conclude by saying I very much take to heart and appreciate the chairman's comments, Mr. Cole, and the entire panel. I appreciate the dialogue. I am well aware of the considerations involving Ukraine and the prospects of what occurs if Ukraine falls. I believe we should have handled this differently with the $113 billion we've already spent. I am sympathetic to potentially additional dollars if it were, in my view, more targeted and more lethal, and if we were honoring, and this is the backbreaker for me, the commitment that we, at least as Republicans, have made to our constituents to secure the border of the United States first. For that reason, I have to remain opposed.